Good afternoon and welcome to Keys to Leading a Hybrid IT Workforce, a Health System CIO Media Inc. production, sponsored by ELLKAY. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. My name is Anthony Guerra. I'm the editor-in-chief of Health System CIO, and I'll be your moderator today. We're looking forward to your participation. Send in your questions or comments at any time in the Q&A box, and we'll take them later in the program. Just so you see how we're going to spend our time, first we're going to do our main panel discussion featuring Lisa Dykstra, SVP and CIO at Ann and Robert H. Lurie Children's Hospital, Chicago, John Kravitz, CIO at Geisinger Health System, Ed McCallister, SVP and CIO at UPMC, and Ajay Kapare, Chief Strategy and Marketing Officer with ELLKAY. And then we will do our audience Q&A. So nice, really important topic today, and we'll get started with our panelists. So Lisa, let's start with you. Can you give us an overview of your organization and your role?
Sure, thank you. As we spoke, I run the information technology organization for the enterprise. I have all the traditional information technology and operations and infrastructure side. In addition, I also am responsible for all the digital health efforts, all of the virtual care. Just recently, data and analytics has transferred over to me as well. We also have a research enterprise, and my team is responsible for the research IT for the organization. So I report directly to the CEO, and we manage all enterprise IT.
All right, very good. John?
Yes, so my role as corporate CIO, have responsibility for our medical school, which is also a graduate school and nursing school. In addition, we have a health plan of approximately 700,000 members. By fall, we pick up some new state enrollees, and the clinical enterprise, which has 11 hospitals and about 300 sites. So I have responsibility globally for that. Work directly, as Lisa does, with the digital technology office and enabling a lot of the work that they're doing in strategy with them. Just overall responsibility for IT, telecom, the traditional roles. In addition to that, we have a biomedical company called ISS, and the CEO of ISS now reports to me over the past year. So that's something that's new, but ties in nicely because we have a lot within our organization and a lot across the country that are under ISS, and they provide services for smaller to medium-sized hospitals throughout the country. So that's a new experience, so enjoying it. Thank you, Anthony.
Thanks, John. Ed?
Sure, I'm just glad I don't have John's job. It sounds kind of hard. So, so Ed McCallister, Senior Vice President, CIO for UPMC. For those of you not familiar, UPMC is a 40 hospital health system. We also have a health plan. We have 90,000 plus employees across the state of Pennsylvania, as well as the surrounding states. Internationally, we have hospitals in Italy, Ireland, and we do some managed services in China. So it's under the purview of my role as CIO. Again, I've been with UPMC 23 years, going on 23 years. We started our health plan at ground zero when I came on board, and right now the health plan and health system are about equal in revenue. We're about a $24 billion organization. So again, look forward to this discussion. It's a transformative time, and I think it's you have the right people here, Anthony, to have this discussion, and thanks for the invite.
Very good. Looking forward to it. Ajay?
Well, first of all, thank you, Anthony, for giving this opportunity. I'm Ajay Kapare. I'm the Chief Strategy and Marketing Officer with ELLKAY. ELLKAY, we are an interoperability solution provider company. We are in 5 segments of healthcare IT, ambulatory and hospital, where we do data migration, conversion, clinical and financial archive, also interop solution there, lab, LIS to EMR integration, order and result portal. We're also in the payer market. A lot of people don't know about it, but we provide clinical data exchange and the interop solution in the payer market. And then we also provide interop for other vendors, other healthcare IT vendors. We are a strong 700 employees now and team members and looking forward to a great discussion that we all are actually going through and discussing about it everywhere.
Very good, AJ. Thank you. All right, Lisa, we're going to start with you. What is your current policy with regard to working remotely? What do you think are its strengths? And are there any elements of it that may need to be adjusted in the future?
Sure. So we offer full remote work for most of my department, as well as we offer it for a large part of the organization. We've been offering remote work for my department 5 or 6 years now, where prior to the pandemic, they were allowed to have about up to 3 days a week remote. Once the pandemic hit, we went to opportunity for full remote, and many of our team take that opportunity. We certainly have some that are hybrid. Obviously, we have folks that need to be on site. Everybody knows that. But we really help the organization drive a full remote work policy housewide. And so we have many departments that now have the opportunity to take advantage of remote work policy, logging in remotely, accessing all the tools that they need to access, including some of our non-exempt staff. And so as the organization was developing those policies, they took ours as a starter, and then we certainly built upon what we had. I would say a lot of our strengths really is meeting the staff where they are, and having that opportunity for them to have flexibility throughout their day is incredibly important. In Chicago, as we are a standalone pediatric hospital in Chicago, there's a lot of competition for IT staff, especially in healthcare, in and around the area. And prior to the pandemic, that was one of our great strengths, was the ability that we had to offer remote work prior to the pandemic. Now that everyone's doing remote work, as we have gone through the pandemic, it really has allowed us to increase other ways to keep our teams engaged and keep our retention high, as well as recruit new team members. In terms of what needs to be adjusted, I think one of the areas that was new to us was working out of state. And certainly, as other healthcare organizations already offer that, I'm looking to learn how they've made that efficient and effective. Certainly, our HR and our legal teams are quite busy, as all other organizations, but taking on that additional work effort to ensure that staff members can work in other states has been slow coming, because it takes a good amount of time and effort from those other teams. So we're looking forward to expanding in different states. We have about 6 or 7 states that we allow remote work now, and hopefully we can expand that into the future.
So 6 or 7 states where you can hire?
Yes.
Right. And I've heard there's a couple of states where it's quite difficult. California and I forget what other one. But anyway, we could talk more about that. Thank you, Lisa. John?
Yeah, I think, so we've had a remote working policy. It's been updated since the pandemic, obviously. It's interesting because we went out full bore remote, and then we started coming back, and then Omicron hit again, and it kind of went back to the masking policy and sent people back out remote, not coming in, because it's so inconvenient to be walking around your office with a mask on or going to meetings with a mask on. Everybody hates it. I hate it. Just not a good situation. So, now I'm in a situation where we've consolidated buildings. We have people that don't want to come in now. They want to stay remote. They're happy with that. We do, virtual rounding with them. We just reach out, call them either on Teams or via cell phone, just to connect with them, see how they're doing. But I'm looking at this and struggling with this a little bit. I go in the office 2 to 3 days a week, every week, and the other times I'm remote, like I am today. I do live a good distance away from where I work now, but it doesn't really matter. I mean, that's just something you deal with, and that's the decision you made. So for us, though, I'm trying to get people more in for team group meetings versus saying, hey, I'd like you to be in hybrid now a day or 2 a week, because price of fuel, all those things, all those factors come into it. And I want to be, have apathy toward our people, but I also don't want to lose people. It's too easy to lose people in a remote working environment. And so, we continuously focus on employee engagement, how we keep them engaged, how we, kind of curtail some of their hours. Honestly, people working remote were working 60 and 70 hours a week, and then they get to the point where they hit burnout. So it's like no one saw that coming, but all of a sudden they're tired, they're exhausted, they don't want to work, they want to look elsewhere for a job because they're working too many hours. That wasn't our suggestion ever, that they work that many hours, but people just have a tendency when they're working remote to be close and connected to their equipment and, tying back into the systems and everything else. So that's a continuous challenge. It's not an easy cut and dry decision how you handle it. And I think every organization is going to be different. As Lisa's saying, we have people all over the country, with the exception of California and a couple other states, and I'm forgetting the other ones too, Anthony, that are challenging to work for. But we have them all over the country. So, Teams has worked well for us. We're primarily a Teams shop, although we do have Zoom too, which is used much more sporadically across our organization. And so, we've getting the work done. I mean, we've put up new systems throughout the pandemic. We continue to do that. So I think the challenge now is just keeping employees to the point where they feel they're engaged. They would recommend, the organization I work for, the organizations you work for, to other employees to keep the pipeline full, if you will. And I think that's the biggest concern that I have at this time.
Interesting. Very good. Ed?
Yeah, sure. I mean, much like Lisa and John, I mean, we were moving in that direction. I think the pandemic accelerated a direction that we were moving in previously. It's been so long, I think we forget that the Googles and the Amazon and some of these tech companies, they redefined what the IT workforce environment would be. We moved from kind of cube farms to a cooler place to work. So that was the challenge pre-pandemic, was having the flexibility and a workspace that IT professionals wanted to work in. So I do think that the Amazons, the Googles, they kind of moved the needle early, and then we were on that trajectory. So we've always had at least the past 5 to 8 years, we've had a remote work policy. When you talk about a policy, though, it's hard because there's so many different roles for IT professionals in healthcare. Like, I have people that have never been remote since the beginning of the pandemic. We had people in hospitals, telemedicine, they need support. They were shoulder to shoulder with a lot of the frontline workers, from the beginning. So, it's hard to say, how's it working for your department, because the department's so spread out. My overriding belief and my overriding direction and informal policy was, hey, if we're meeting the customer needs, then it's working. But if we're not meeting the customer needs, we need to be able to be nimble enough to react immediately and not do an assessment and have a vote what we should do. But and I count the patient as one of our customers. So anything that had an impact in a not positive way about what our workforce was doing, and again, including all the challenges that Lisa and John referenced, it's a very difficult climate to report or to recruit workers. My thing is always that there's a special place for healthcare professionals in IT, because there are a lot of great options out there. You Google, I'm sure if you wanted to be in the search engine business, I think Google's a great thing. But I think that a lot of our employees, a lot of our IT employees are passionate about what they do. So the idea of adjusting as needed, as the needs grew from our patients and customers, was always met with a welcoming open arms for the most part. But I do think the biggest challenge I have is you can't have a standard policy across the board, because there's certain pieces of the profession that need to be here on site. Any elements that need to be adjusted in the future, I'd say that's probably the biggest adjustment we need to make, is to understand from our teams, and not determine that we have the answers, but rather listen and watch what's working, what's not working, and be able to adjust as we move forward.
So, Ed, you're talking about really a position by position policy. It depends on what the job is. And as you mentioned, it depends on if the customer's needs are being met. And I suppose, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the mechanisms you have for determining that, whether or not those needs are being met.
Yeah, sure. So there's a couple of ways we do it. First, I mean, it's, when you're talking telemedicine and you have physicians that are in the office, and, you don't want to try to train remote. So as we transition to telemedicine, I'm sure that my colleagues or my fellow CIOs would tell you that the trajectory for telemedicine. We all have our numbers and they're pretty amazing, right? To be able to do that, we needed people here on site. So, that was the physical nature of some of the positions. We also have a patient experience initiative going on here at UPMC, and we have scores where the customer grades the IT organization. They're called LEM scores, right? And it's how well we're doing as far as the customer's voice. So I watched some of the numbers during the pandemic when we were remote increase from, say, the low 80s into the high 90s. So I think there was additional communication. So there are metrics to measure, if the position's working, if it's not working within the LEM world. So that's the physical metric, but it's also, we still have that thing called a telephone, and we still have the email, and I hear from the customer when it's not working. So that's probably one of the key measures as to whether it's working or not working. But some are easier, Anthony, than others to measure. I mean, some are just common sense. You physically need to be on site. Others, not so much. John mentioned something interesting. I've always had and I'm sure we're going to get into it, but when we have the, hey, 2 days a week, I want to see you in the office. And I asked some of my colleagues, like, what's the rationale behind that in other areas? They're like, well, I think you just need to be there to stay connected. And I believe that, what's worked, when you say what elements have worked thus far, I would say that I haven't seen a degradation in kind of the team concept of what we're doing because it's not physical, but because it's virtual. I've actually seen an increase in some areas.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Ajay?
First of all, I want to actually say that, what John, Ed, and Lisa said, I mean, what they have to do in the hybrid work environment is very different than being a vendor. And, I want to give kudos to all our health system and everyone working in healthcare IT. I mean, during the pandemic, what Ed mentioned, I mean, some of these people, they were on site and, they didn't worry about their own life or their family or anything. And they were there and, doing the things that they were supposed to do. So, that's a lot of work if you really see that way. And, putting systems like Teams or anything or telehealth and getting them up and live, it must have been like a lot of day and nights for all of them. From our side, I mean, to be honest, Anthony, as a ELLKAY, as a company, we are very big in our culture. And we have two things which are very important for us. One is customer first, and second is employee satisfaction. And, we actually looked at it during pandemic. Obviously, everyone was remote. I was remote from the day one that I started here as a company. So, when you look at your, your employees, your talent, and you see, we do surveys, we did surveys, we asked who's ready, who's not ready. And, we kept it, we gave an option as being in hybrid. There are certain groups, definitely you need them, in person at the office. But others actually, as they get, feel comfortable, we give option because you can't have one standard policy because there are some people who like to come to office. They don't like distraction at home.
Right.
And then there are some people who are very satisfied being at home. But at the same time, what John mentioned is right. A lot of us, we don't know where do you cut, when do you start work and when do you end the work? Because being at home, we are just there 24/7 now. Like, you're taking calls and you're working long hours. And just like John and Ed and Lisa, even we worry, like, so we introduced some programs like, let's do happy hour, some employee satisfaction or remotely, during pandemic. And now we're doing more and more things like, some yoga classes. Our HR team is really trying to actually make sure that, we had this chair yoga, I didn't know the chair yoga also works, by the way, and I started doing it and it helps because a majority of our time we're sitting on the chair, looking at the screen. So there are some things like that, but if you talk about just working remotely, it has to be employee and employee satisfaction and see what makes them comfortable. It is getting harder and harder to, hire some good talent. So, we are looking at all remote places now, wherever we can find good talent and wherever we can actually take to the next level. So it's very interesting nowadays.
Very good, AJ. Thank you for that. John, let's start with you on the next question. Many say There are certain types of meetings or collaborations that do not work well in a Zoom-like environment or do not work as well as in person. Do you agree with that? What interactions are not suited to remote communication? And I've spoken to CIOs that say one of the big things they want to improve is the virtual conference room or meeting environment. And this is something that's very important because it can be suboptimal to really have a collaborative meeting where you need a lot of back and forth when, in the digital environment where, it's multiple people trying to speak at the same time and people just quit, after one or two times when they tried to talk and they just said, forget it, I'm just going to be quiet, which is the last thing you want. So, John, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, I think you need to set the ground rules for etiquette in using a Teams or Zoom approach. Raise your hand if you have a comment you'd like to make or a question you'd have. I mean, it's so important for the person leading the meeting. And that's what we've done. We've instituted a process that, please don't speak because you'll speak over someone else because of delays and things like that cause challenges. And I think for the most part, a Zoom-like environment works for us. There are certain scenarios where it doesn't work quite as well. We're looking at something called root learning, where we share the strategy of the organization all the way through to our line employees, all the way down 25,000 people. And we've done some management training with that. It was a little bit lackluster, remote. When we got together just last week, we did it in person just for the executive leadership team. And then we'll take that down to our people. But in person really had a much better experience. There's certain situations where that is the case. You have questions. If you do it remote, you've got breakout rooms, a question will pop up. It's got to be coordinated really closely, almost like you're directing a show or a movie. It's really a lot of work when you're thinking about remote work. It's tough. And so for most of us in IT, we just want to get the job done. I'm not worried about being a production artist and planning this thing out appropriately. I want to get the job done. I want to make sure the communication's occurring with our people. They understand, where their expectations are. I listen to them. I want to hear their thoughts on things. And we can do that with etiquette, using the Zoom type or Teams type environment, with just simply raising your hand and tracking things that way so we don't talk over one another. I think for the most part, and the other part, we talked about this, Ed mentioned it, Lisa and Ajay, we've got people all over the country. It's tough to get them all in, and unless it's a retreat that we're pulling an IT retreat, and we're going to fly people in for it, it's got to be pretty special, really planned out, very, very focused to be able to get the value for bringing people in from all over the country. So, those are factors that come into play. So I think that would be the only thing I would have to offer on that, Anthony.
Anything about the conference room technology? You talked about Zoom, but are there any things you're looking at to go beyond that?
Well, I did mention in our shop, for the most part, with the exception of the board, they love Zoom. The board is comfortable with Zoom. They weren't as comfortable with Teams. So we as an organization are completely Teams. As soon as the pandemic hit, we started rolling Teams out. We had Skype. We rolled out Office 365 in the cloud with Teams in the cloud, and have had a lot of advances to that over the past year and a half. And it's worked really well for us. So in conference rooms, we typically have Surface Hubs, in the large rooms, or we use another augmented solution for that. But it's worked well. People can see an entire conference room. They could hear it well because of the microphone placement and things like that. To be honest with you, there's not a lot of conference room meetings these days. They're mostly remote, in our environment anyway. But, the key is to plan your message and get that message across clearly and succinctly with your people and give them the opportunity to feedback, because that feedback is so critical these days, because it's almost like you can't do management by walking around in this new environment, which is challenging, because I love to just drop in. I'll give you an example. Last week, I just went on a quick walk at lunchtime, clear my head, rough morning, went for a walk, stopped in a data center and just wanted to see people. Well, when the CIO stops in a data center at lunchtime, people are like, oh no, what's wrong? And there's nothing wrong. It was great. And I got them to loosen up in about a minute, and everybody was happy and fine. And I just, I'm talking to my wife about this, and it's ironic. She goes, hey, you haven't, bought pizza for your people for a while. It's like, I'm doing that tomorrow. And it did. And they were like, so happy. It was just, hey, you thought about us for a change. And we're the people that have been in here day in and day out since the pandemic began. And we're going to do the same thing for all of our, workstation analysts and such all the way across and around with them. And it's so important that we do that, and sometimes they're so wrapped in doing strategy and planning and, the next great thing. How about we take care of our people that got us there? And to me, that's really important that we stay connected with them. So.
Excellent. Ed?
Yeah, John brings up some great points. I'll tell you, there's definitely not a one size fits all, but we've been on the journey, and this is a very much a positive. We've been on the journey toward the modern workplace pre-pandemic because of not because in anticipation of a pandemic, but because of our growth strategy across the state and internationally. So we went to Office 365 pre-pandemic, and we were on that journey, and we upgraded our network and our bandwidth and what we had the ability to do because we were stretching outside of our Western Pennsylvania footprint. And I think that helped a lot, because we were familiar with some of the tools. So I'll tell you what I think has worked well. So if you think about our IT town hall meetings, so I conduct a town hall meeting quarterly. We have 2,000 people on the town hall chats. We do a Teams live. And, we get some questions in advance. And at the end, when we have enough time, we'll ask questions. So it kind of manages the conversation because it's me speaking and then taking questions and being able to address any of the conversations that would happen to come up. I think that the training that John mentioned, and I don't want to even call it training, I think the intuitive nature of the tools is helpful. And I have to give kudos to Microsoft, which you don't like to do often, give these big vendors too much credit, but they've been kind of in lockstep with what we've needed as an organization, as an industry. So what I've seen happen when we do have a meeting and there are a number of people in it, say just a management meeting where you have 300 people in a call, the raising of hands, has worked good. And I think the etiquette has improved dramatically. I think initially it wasn't that I found less people talking over one another, but more people kind of resistant to participate because they didn't know where to jump in. So it was a lack of participation. I think that was a challenge in the early days. But if I go to current state, I think that, when we have the very large meetings, we do it through Teams Live. When we have a more manageable group of people, we have the etiquette in place, the hand raising, and we do the facilitation of the meeting. As far as meetings not suited for remote communications, that's a difficult one because I haven't really found. I mean, happy hour obviously works better in person. That whole remote happy hour thing, it's okay, but I think we create other problems of people sitting alone with a glass of wine. So I do think it's important that we listen to our teams and not decide like, hey, this is the best way to use the tools. This is what works. This is what doesn't work. I get feedback continuously after like a town hall meeting. Hey, this could be done. This couldn't be covered. We'd rather hear from these people. So we created meetings called the bridges, building bridges meetings, right? So what I do is one of my direct reports, they have the floor and they educate the rest of the management team around what's happening. I think I'd point to that as something that works better than when we were on site because you didn't take the time to go to the different areas, but this allows for a larger forum of people to understand, say we have, because as John does, we have a health plan, right? We have an insurance arm that's very large. We also have the provider side with 40 hospitals, and we also have international, and we have our cancer center. So we know all of those things are happening and we can read the tech news and understand it. But I think that this forum, this virtual forum gives the opportunity to educate ourselves across the different meetings that we've had historically that have been like, if you could learn it if you want, but if you don't worry about it. Jumping in on a virtual meeting, I think is very helpful. As for the remote, the conference room environment, I agree with John. There are very few meetings that happen in a conference room. You have some board meetings, and some committees that meet in the boardroom, but most of the time that's not necessarily everybody in the boardroom that's in a boardroom because they have to be in a boardroom. So most people opt to join virtually. So, and the equipment's expensive, by the way. I hear from our tech folks that support it. They're like, hey, we can make this thing, a Hollywood production, but how much do we want to do? How expensive is it? Where's the return on on the investment. So I haven't really come across an issue with the conference room other than it could always be better and it can always be more expensive. And as a healthcare provider, is that really where we want to spend our money?
Very good, Lisa.
Well, John and Ed have said a lot, and we have quite a bit of similarity. I would say, what we're all needing to learn is how to work better in a hybrid space. All in person or all virtual works fine, but in that hybrid environment where you do need to provide some of that time for some white space if you're ideating on some goals, or if you're doing some planning sessions. I think we've thrown a lot of technology and applications at folks. We are also a Microsoft shop. We implemented O365 prior to the pandemic, accelerated Teams, accelerated OneDrive, SharePoint Online, OneNote Online, all of that we accelerated. But what we're trying to do now is catch up and really help folks use these tools. I think from an IT perspective, many of us know how to use those tools, but when we think about everybody else in the hospital, our nurses who have to jump on quality meetings, our physicians who have to jump on other types of meetings, navigating that space is not necessarily something they've spent time educating themselves on these different tools, which is why people navigate to the Zoom. It's like the one-click thing. But when you're in an environment from a hybrid perspective, you need to have those key etiquette features, but you also need to help educate folks more and more on how to use them. And we try to do that. We haven't always done a great job. I think, when we think about the different types of education teams we need in the future, we need teams that will really help challenge the organization on using our digital assets to their fullest. So we need a different kind of education team as well. We need those digital navigators that really will help people leverage these tools and technologies to their advantage. We did a lot of things during the pandemic to collaborate, whether that's, we still have the same thing of town halls, raise your hand. We use the chat feature a lot. When I think about our use with the executive team and our board members, it gets a little bit less utilized. And so how do we continue to engage folks in that? And whether I'm sitting next to someone in a conference room or I'm on a virtual call with them, I always try to give some tips and tricks, right? You should try this. You should use OneNote Online, and let's post that everything to the Teams channel instead of sending this around an email. And I think we have to help people navigate that more. So I don't know that there's certain types of meetings that work better virtual or in person. Certainly if you have an all-day planning session, some of us in our roles are part of our enterprise's all-day planning sessions. Certainly that is not fun to be on an 8-hour virtual call. But other than that, I think any of those types of meetings can work as long as you have the ground rules set and as long as people know how to use and navigate the technology. From a conference room perspective, I would echo what Ed said. There's a lot of expense that goes into it. And right now it's about figuring out which conference rooms should we still have as conference rooms? Do we start getting rid of some of our conference rooms? We're in downtown Chicago, so we have teams in multiple buildings. And so, we are taking a look at footprint in all of those buildings to help shrink the footprint that we have, save some costs there. But what are the things we need to put in place? Switching things to hoteling space versus offices or cubicle spaces is some of the things that we're working on.
That's great, Lisa. I think that's an excellent point you made about not taking for granted that the employees, especially the clinicians, are comfortable using all these technologies that you're putting out there. And we've done webinars on training and how important, usually around the EHR, but to put any tool out there without training is not going to make the CIO very popular. So it's a great point. Ajay, I want to ask you a question. I've known you for a while, and when I think of you, I think of you traveling, right? I mean, you travel all the time, or at least you used to. So I wanted to get your thoughts on I mean, would you always rather speak to someone in person if you can? Or does it depend on the person, depend on the type of conversation? Because you historically go see people. You go to conferences, you go see people. So there's something a little bit better about being face to face. But what are your thoughts around that?
So, that face to face is not going to go away. Okay. I mean, you end up actually learning a lot. You end up actually talking a lot, but during pandemic, I mean, pre-pandemic, at pandemic, and I look at post-pandemic, one of the things I've learned is some of the meetings you don't have to travel. You can do it over a Zoom or anything. And because, during pandemic, I have done virtual lunch, virtual dinners, virtual happy hours. We have done through Chime, we have done wine tasting event once, and they work. But when you go and meet people in person, like the first time, maybe, when I met John or Lisa at conferences, I haven't met Ed yet, but that vibe, it feels fantastic. I also feel you can't email a handshake, when you meet someone, that feeling is different. You end up learning more actually in a group setting. But at the same time, now I have become actually more like particular. Okay, which are the meetings I want to go in person? What are it's not just business and important meeting. It's also about, hey, I have this rule. What can I learn when I travel? Who can I learn from? And what can I do with them together? So I have been pretty choosy on those things. And, it also helps you to balance it out. But I personally feel that conferences, some of the in-person meeting, the collaboration, for example, I met John and, we were talking about one topic and then we went to 4 other things actually, which are out there. And then you learn how the market is shifting, how the market trends are happening. And Lisa and I, we talked, and as a follow-up, we talked about ERP and then we talked about interop and then we talked about how the market is shifting. Some of those things, you just can't do it over Zoom because you don't know, what is working, what's not working. And over Zoom, I have, it's me personally, but if it is a bigger meeting, you're going to lose people right away. First half an hour, you can get people interested, talk and focus. After an hour, you have lost most of the people. People go off camera, people are mute, people start doing emails and other things. But when you go and meet in person, you have a complete attention from your side and from their side.
That's true. That's true. You never know what they're up to in the meeting. This is something that I personally am interested in, and because I've spoken to a lot of CIOs and a lot of CISOs, and I consistently have been hearing, from the executive level, oh, yes, we come in. We come in 4 days a week, 5 days a week, 3 days a week. John said 3 days a week. But I'm hearing that consistently, and I'm also hearing just as consistently, oh, I'm fine with everybody working remotely who works for me. There's something there that just, to me, there's an issue that's going to take place there. So I just want to see if anybody agrees with me, or if they think this will cause no problems in the future when the executives are all in and everyone, all the employees or a lot of employees are remote. Ed?
Yeah, so you're right. It is I don't know if it's a 2-tier system. I mean, we've talked about a lot of reasons, but just to step back and to Lisa's point earlier, we've gone from where we were in 22 physical locations around the different areas that I described in the tri-state, right in the Pittsburgh, Western Pennsylvania area, to we have 3 hoteling arrangements, right? So we have areas for enough people to be there and the equipment and everything they need to do their jobs, right? And I think it's important for me to go to those locations on occasion to ensure that that I'm visible there. As far as coming into the office, I think it goes back to the discussion around, like, I have people that have always come into the office or never come in. I think in our roles, and many times in executive roles, it's the expectation, because there are some meetings that are in person. So the expectation is that you're there. It's a smaller group. There are things that are more comfortable to be discussed, and for all the reasons Ajay just pointed out, you could read and you could, it's scripted. I think if I were to look at the difference between if you come in person versus virtual, it's much less scripted, I think, when you're in person. And I think that's important because you maybe go a little deeper into some of the discussions and some of the topics that you want to discuss. I'd challenge that with, you know, I'm later in my career. I'm not a Gen Z guy, obviously, right? So what I'm always aware of is that I don't want to tell people what caused me to be successful or as successful as, you know, as you want to be. I can't really say that's the way to go. Here's the roadmap. If you want to be CIO of UPMC, this is the roadmap. So I think it's important to understand that, you know, today's world, everybody's connected. So whereas this is kind of new to people, you know, hey, the pandemic and this virtual world, you got the folks that are in Gen Z and millennials that they've been connected since they received their smartphone, or, you know, their first phone. So it's not a new thing. Hey, they don't know the piece that Ajay just described, where, you know, you can't have a virtual handshake. They're like, yeah, you can. You know, they do virtual handshakes. You know, so I really think it's an understanding of the entire population when we talk about two-tier system. I'd go deeper than a two-tier system. I'd say it's an individual system that meets the needs of our customers and our patients. So I don't think that executives coming into the office should be the kind of the measurement that we use to say, like, how many days should somebody come into the office? Because I tell you, because I've made that mistake early on. I'm like, hey, maybe there is a reason we should be in the office. Look, when I was there, I'd run into somebody or run into my boss, and that's great for me, but It's a different world now. And Anthony, just a little fun fact, right? I mean, when you talk about how people connected in the world, I mean, there are 8 billion people in the world, and you guys probably know this stat, like 84% have smartphones. So the entire world is a different world than when I was coming through and having meetings and interactions with others. So I don't think it's an issue, and I don't think it'll be a two-tier system, but rather what works for the individual, but more importantly, what works for the patient and the customer.
And it's such a great point, Ed, that, you know, what made people successful 20 years ago may not be because the problem that I was having is, in my mind, when I wanted to be successful earlier in my career, it was being around my boss and learning from her. And so then I'm like, well, that's not happening, right? If we have the executives in and everyone else at home, how are the people at home going to get to that next level? They can't be around the person they want to emulate and learn from. But your point is very valid, that it's a different world and you can't take the old paradigm and just fit it on today. Lisa, your thoughts?
Yeah, no, this is a great topic. I would say both internally, our executive team has been hybrid as well. I actually choose to come in. I love to come in because this is a little hokey. I am a Chicago native. I love my drive in on Lakeshore Drive. It's a great drive in. It's a great drive home. The opportunity to decompress before you get home. I love that. But I also love being around people. So I choose to come in. What I really appreciate, though, is that it's become so much more acceptable to dial in on any ad hoc day or any regular day. So I do appreciate, I know our executive team appreciates the fact that it's much more acceptable. We have some executives that are full-time remote, and we have some that are full-time here and some that are hybrid. When I think about it more globally, I spend a lot of time with non-healthcare CIOs, just as much as I spend with healthcare CIOs. And you know, these are companies that have been hybrid or fully virtual for years and years and years, and they are incredibly successful companies. So certainly we cannot claim virtual or in-person makes you more successful. I think we have examples after examples of organizations that have done it virtually. The other piece that I think is incredibly important is making sure that we acknowledge the fact that our clinicians are here in person every day taking care of patients. And so the ability to see clinicians throughout the day, and you know, whether you're talking to them, whether you're just passing them in the hallway, and just recognizing that they are here in person. They also appreciate the fact that their leadership teams are here on a regular basis. When we talk about bringing people in, as my team knows, make it meaningful. You know, if you're going to ask staff members to come in on any, you know, 1 day a week or 1 day a month or whatever the cadence is, just make it meaningful. Go out and do site visits, walk around the organization. Don't require people to come on site just to sit at their cube and have 8 hours worth of virtual meetings. Don't do it.
That's such a
It's no point. There's no point to that. So make it meaningful. And I will tell you, a lot of our team members, I've been so proud of the work that they've been doing. A lot of our team members have been bringing folks in, and they're having mini retreats. And that's the time they're using for that white space, you know, think tank to really think about process improvement or projects that are coming up, and have some planning sessions. And they've done a great job of that. We have shown the organization we can be productive, whether virtual or on-site. And again, we were doing virtual prior. So our productivity hasn't shifted. Do you ever, every once in a while, have an employee that, you need to ensure that they're providing enough productivity? Yes, but that's no different than if they were in person. So I think you can manage it. I think we've put a lot on our management teams in order to be able to manage and track all of this remote and hybrid work. I think we need to be kind to our management teams as to all of the additional work that they've taken on and pressures that they've taken on to keep people connected. But from my perspective, I don't see a two-tier system. I think we have a lot of examples across every different kind of industry as to how to be successful with this. And I think we need to make our in-person interactions meaningful.
Very good points. Very good. John?
I think the points that Ed and Lisa made, I don't want to be redundant because they were good points. They're excellent points, actually. And we don't see a two-tier system developing. I don't see it, not for our organization. I think Ed had talked about, Google and Amazon, everybody else working. They've done a fantastic job being remote. And that's just the way that they're wired to be remote. And, I see very much the same from us. My only concern was, and Lisa hit it and nailed it right on the head, was, maybe they come in for a mini retreat, or you get together to whiteboard session or something like that, where it might be more effective in person. It might be, I'm air quoting that, versus doing it via a remote, and some people just don't live in proximity that's even reasonable to get there. So that may not work for them, but I think that might be the situation. And my main concern is employee engagement, keeping them engaged so I don't continue to lose employees to other industries or other, providers in healthcare that could work remote everywhere, but making them feel, or at least providing the capability for them to feel truly engaged in our environment and wanting to stay within the organization. We've done the market adjustments and just like everybody else. But there's always going to be that perceived greener pasture out there for a remote worker. And that greener pasture could be, maybe it's 30% more salary than they're getting now. Well, what's the downside of that? When they get there, they find out and then often reach back and say, is my old job still available? I'd really like to consider it because I like the culture. I like the organization. I'd like to try to avoid that as much as possible. It's human nature. It's going to happen. But that to me would be the important factor, is the employee engagement. Do we need to bring them in for these mini retreats, whiteboard planning sessions, whatever it might be, just to keep them engaged from time to time? And maybe that is remote too. I don't know. But there's not pressure by our executive team. In fact, I report to the COO and he is in 5 days a week all the time. And there's never been pressure on me. My meetings with him, my one-on-ones with him they could be teams. I choose to go in person. I think it's more important for me to do that. And that's those days that I'm in the office or when I can meet with institute leaders or anyone else, because to me, that's my perception. I'm old school. I've been in this a long time, like Ed referenced, and I feel like it's more valuable. That's just me. That doesn't mean it's necessarily the case. It could be more valuable for Gen X, Gen Ys, and other people to do it remotely. I mean, that's the way they've cut their teeth, so to speak, and they've come into the workforce, and it's very much accepted now. It's a different world than where it was 3 years ago. So,
Ajay, what I'm hearing is a big concern around employee retention, and that's a huge underlying issue here, because people can leave for 30% more very easily. There's a shortage of people, which you mentioned. So companies have to be very, it sounds like companies, I don't know, walking on eggshells, but they're being very careful with the employees they have because it's so easy to lose them. And you have to try and discern what do they want? Do they want more engagement? Do they want less? Do they want to come in? Do they want these events where we come and have a happy hour? Or if I tell them they have to come in for a happy hour, they don't want to, they get annoyed. And some people you're going to make happy, some people you're going to annoy. But I think the bigger point I'm making is that it is an employee's market. And I hear that as an undercurrent here.
Yeah, I'll start with this. My founders, Kamal and Lior, they have built such a great culture here at ELLKAY. And, culture actually plays a very big role in employee retention, employee satisfaction, being remote also, or hybrid model also, I have learned a lot from both of them that you have to take out time, check on your people, spend time with them. It's not just work actually, but you also have to check on with them. You can be an exec, you can be a VP, but you're working and what is going on with you? Like, how can I help you? What are some of the pressures that you have? Or, sometimes just being remote, you don't know what they're going through. What are some of the challenges? And, that is what, a lot of the leaders here within our organization, at least, have been doing with everyone. So that plays a very big role. And because of that culture, we do have, but we don't have that much pressure like other companies have a problem of people leaving. There is also training in remote environment. How do you do training? And we are adjusting, one of the things we are doing since being, completely going, since pandemic, we're hiring people where the talent is. And then, we are actually adjusting, some of our training and education, maybe if they're not good, then we take feedback and then we change. I feel like I take the philosophy of Moneyball. You don't have to hit home runs. You just have to keep on adjusting small things, keep on taking singles, make adjustment here, make adjustment there, work on with them, ask them what works for you. A virtual happy hour with one group may work. It may work in person with other work. We had like take a pet and, bring your pet to a Zoom, and we had, and, I saw some of the people have some really different kind of pets. I didn't even know they have, something like this, a goat at home or something. And you learn a lot actually from people, you learn who they are. And we have tried our best actually to ensure we have newsletter, we do town halls. But we have a very open door policy where people can come, they can give a suggestion to us and we'll apply those suggestions.
All right, very good. We have 3 audience questions I want to get in. I'm only going to ask one individual to respond for the sake of time. First question, any requirements for in-person, quote, all hands present at certain points throughout the year for team building and or leadership meetings? Lisa?
So I wouldn't necessarily say requirements that are already detailed out, but certainly when we are having some of those planning sessions, those are definitely opportunities and high suggestions to come in person, and that is at the executive level as well as within the department. I think also when we think about some of our big implementations and go lives, certainly just went live with our ERP system. Certainly we had folks in person for that. So I think some of our key go lives where you do need to be here in person at the elbow or otherwise in solution team mode, those lend themselves to really good discussions in person. So I wouldn't say necessarily there's key requirements throughout the year, but as those things come up, we've had really great compliance with that as well. I would say staff do enjoy having those in-person times just as much as they enjoy being virtual. So I would say those are some of the key areas that we would request that they be in person, but certainly, especially if they're now in one of the different states that we've allowed, if it's not feasible, we don't necessarily require it as long as we have good connectivity for them to be a part of it.
Very good. John, I'll pose the next question to you. How entrenched are your organizations in other productivity tools in IT, for example, Slack, Trello, versus traditional email? And are you looking at implementing these as remote becomes the norm?
We've implemented the Microsoft tools for that purpose. We haven't gone out to Slack or any others for that purpose. And yeah, we've deployed all the tools we can. We do KPI, metrics and other things. We do dashboards. We track our productivity. We look at benchmarking all the time. Every time we're looking to fill a position, we're using benchmarking. So metrics to us are extremely important. It's one way I know as a manager how we can manage the operation, and numbers don't lie. They tell the story, and we need to react accordingly. Tools, though, to us are extremely important so that we can provide a better working environment for our employees.
All right, very good. I got to read a question from Bill Spooner, the wise man in the industry. Great discussion. Anthony brought up a good point on management development. So I want to say good point, Bill, for mentioning that I brought up a good point. I'm reading that the greater rate of change in the 21st century demands greater leadership development. Do you agree? If so, how are you fostering leadership development? Ed?
So I think leadership development, to me, I don't necessarily see it as something new. I mean, something that we're doing. I mean, when we're talking about leadership development in this new world, I'll step back and say, I think that we're talking about 3 distinct time periods, right? So we have pre-pandemic and what we did and how we reacted pre-pandemic. During the pandemic, it was born of necessity how we managed and built our leadership and made sure we stayed connected. I mentioned that we have skip level meetings virtually and tried not to lose track of the development of our management teams. UPMC, we have a TRM, talent review management process, where we work with HR. We just had a virtual session for the first time where we went through the talent and said, okay, here's, with a 9-box exercise, right? So we still do that. And that's in, I would consider still the pandemic area. Post-pandemic, I think, is still being defined. I don't think we're post-pandemic yet. So a lot of what we talked about was how will we behave, like bringing people back in the office. I mean, this is all kind of very much evolving. So to the question of Mr. Spooner, I think it's probably the most important thing we do, because the biggest risk we have with transitioning from the pre-pandemic world, the pandemic to post-pandemic, is we lose those leaders along the way and they feel disconnected for some reason. So I think it's an excellent question. I think that the third bucket of time, which we're entering into now, is going to be critical in how successful we are moving forward as we develop the future leaders within the technology industry as well as healthcare.
Yeah, I think that's the issue right there, Ed. It's the mentoring of the level below the CIO, especially if those individuals are fully remote. I think that's the secret sauce, is figuring out how they are ready to move up to that next level when you don't have that in-person interaction. I just want to read one comment by Jamie Nelson, and then I'm going to let everyone go. In hybrid arrangements where staff are given the choice about coming into the office, I'm concerned that those who choose to work remotely may be disadvantaged long-term. If leaders are on site, staff on site get increased access by proximity, and those choosing to work remotely may likely be women who still bear more household responsibilities. So women may slide back in workplace gains. I think that is another valid point and something that people need to think about. Well, that's about all we had time for today. Regarding continuing education, you could use the final slide in this deck. You'll get an email when the on-demand recording is ready for viewing. If you want to sponsor an event with us, you can reach out to Nancy Wilcox from our team, and you go to our website to register for upcoming webinars. I want to thank our panel, Lisa Dykstra, Ed McCallister, John Kravitz, and Ajay Kapare. And I want to thank ELLKAY very much for sponsoring and making this event possible, and you for attending. And with that, everybody have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thanks.